So I am your facilitator today, and I was also expecting Peg, but I wasn't sure if one of the two other people who've joined us is Peg trying to join us and not just the same name. So I was just going to check.
Doesn't look like it.
Right. And so I think there was a handout in your packet that if it's helpful for the conversation, gives us kind of 3 guiding questions, but I didn't know if one of you wanted to be our report out person when we all come back together at 2:30, and if one of you wanted to take notes, it would just be the bullet points of what we discussed that would go to Remy.
I'm happy to do either.
Yeah,
one.
I'll take notes. I'm usually a pretty good note taker. Peter, do you want to do the report out then?
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
All right, so you have some material at your hands that we can use informally as we go on. And I think on the handout that has the 3 questions for us, it also tried to take from the executive summary, that like kind of oversized 2-page document that was, I think, a PDF that Remy sent you, some of the values that were in it that I think we also heard this morning or this afternoon from Kelly around equity, family voice, kind of the Raise Up Oregon strategic plan values of the cross sector, the fact that all 5 state agencies are involved, really wanting to think about quality and continuous improvement, and the use of data. So we just highlighted those as we kind of think, because we were wondering if part of the conversation is kind of for long-term big picture, does the Raise Up Oregon strategic plan still resonate with you guys? And do you see kind of glaring differences now that COVID and the Black Lives Movement have really highlighted disparities, maybe even in a more clear or different way than before that we already knew about? So, I think we're trying to think about that, as well as, Alyssa will be thinking about the next year. So I think we can kind of weigh or kind of brainstorm based on your experience and thoughts, kind of what conversation you'd like to have with your council members when we come back together.
So if I can jump in. We've been doing interviews with people, with families, and also with systems leaders since November. The bulk of them were before COVID, but we've been continuing doing as we can via Zoom during COVID. And in addition to what we learned from those interviews and what we're seeing in our community, if I had my preference, I would take system goal number 1 from Raise Up Oregon.
Yeah,
I would take that and make it number 2, and I would take system goal number 2 and make it number 1, because the instability. I can't begin to tell you how often the word anxiety came up in the interviews. In almost every single interview, there was some time about extreme anxiety. People struggling so much with housing, struggling so much with, can they get the basic necessities? So that's become a really preoccupation for me now with our work, that we're really looking at family stability being really the key that we have to focus on. So we're working with our collaboration, Southern Work Success collaboration of education and healthcare and human services and public safety and workforce development. And pretty much everybody in the collaboration has moved in that direction of family stability as being the priority.
And this is even, and a lot of these was even before all of this hit.
Correct.
Where we're really anticipating the increase of isolation and instability.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
No, I appreciate that, Peter, because I think that I like how you pointed out that this is even, some of those interviews were pre-COVID and others post-COVID, but still, I think that what I've seen is that the pandemic has just put a spotlight on things that were already there, issues that already existed. And I see the same thing, that is at the base. That number 2 is the base. First, we need families to be stable and safe, and then move. I mean, we're doing all 3 of these goals at the same time, obviously.
Right.
but still, that I think that number 2, that children are raised in healthy, stable, and attached families, is really the foundation that we have to really focus on. And one of the goals that I had written down as well was supporting the social and emotional development of children and their parents, not just children and their parents. That's a big one for me too. So I'm glad that you pointed that out right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, those numbers of 1, 2, 3 were never meant to suggest priority area. I think they were meant, like kind of what you said, Angie, of simultaneously working on, and that there may be priorities within both that race to the top. And wonder if some of those things have shifted for you guys of like, so there might be an overall emphasis that both of you are reflecting on around family stability, and that maybe people aren't used to always thinking about goal number 2 of being a heart of an early childhood, even if we all know that the parents and caregivers in their lives is where it's all happening. But you're right, there were supposed to be priorities in all 3, right, that we're kind of reflecting on.
You know, another thing that's been on my mind since all of this happened is just how responsive are we really being? And as Peter, it sounds like the Southern Oregon collaboration is really getting to the heart of that by finding out what parents and stakeholders really need. We've been doing that as the pandemic rolled out, just reaching out to families more by phone and trying to talk to them and find out what they need. And that just got me to thinking about, we should be doing that all the time. We should be doing that all the time. And that I don't feel like we are as responsive as we can and should be, because we have these frameworks that we have to live within. And I'll give you a specific example. I have funding for early Head Start. OPK is the same. So right now my funding just comes from federal, but OPK is modeled after that. And I'm going to hopefully get that funding as well in this first round that's going to be announced later this week. So here's my example. Early Head Start, if it is center-based, has to be 1,380 hours per week in the center.
Right.
But it is for people who are at 100% and less of poverty. So those may be people that are not working.
Right.
And I have a lot of families. I've been here for 5 years or 5.5 years now. I have a lot of families that really want their 2-year-olds to have that center-based experience, but they don't want or need them to be there 5 days a week all day. But there's not a choice. It's either you're in home-based or you're in this program and center-based, but now you have an attendance requirement.
Right.
And it's not responsive. So that's one example, really. Mm-hmm. But I think that being responsive to family needs is, and I don't know where it fits in here. It fits all through here, really.
Right.
You attach it to one particular objective. Right. I think it's through the whole thing that we need to be responsive, and by being responsive is also knowing what real needs are, not what we perceive as the need to be, or our boxed solutions that are one size fits all. That's been really heavy on me lately. So
we're getting this to the same place here too. One of the interviews was with a woman who works in migrant education, and she talked about some of the families that she works with. They don't necessarily want their 3-year-old to be gone from the house for an extended period of time, or even their 4-year-old. They like the idea that they have time with their children. So sure, big pushes. Don't presume that every family needs full-time preschool. Don't presume that. There are people, and there are different cultures that have different approaches in terms of how children should be raised. So that was kind of a good breakthrough for us. On the outreach point, the Family Nurturing Center, our Relief Nursery in Medford, they're also in Grants Pass. They did a survey. They did a proactive survey at the start of the coronavirus, and they got a huge number of responses. And no surprise, what families needed were diapers.
Yeah.
They need diapers. They needed activity kits for so the kids have something to do. And then someone just needed money for basic supplies, just things like, cleaning supplies or food, etc. And a kind of cool story is once that information came out, several groups, part of our collaboration, just got together and started to get people what they needed. They said they needed diapers, so we organized a diaper run, and we got diapers out to people. The Early Learning Hub came up with hundreds of activity packets, and we had people from all sorts of different organizations delivering the activity packets. And Listo worked with College Dreams, is an organization in our area that focuses on post-high school success, but they put their entire staff at the service of Listo to make sure that the families that Listo was working with had food. So their staff was delivering food to Listo families. So we can do this, and we need to do it on an ongoing basis and scaled up basis. But I think you're hitting two significant keys. We have to find effective ways to get the information what families actually need. And we can't make that presumption that we know what they need. We have to actually listen to what they actually need.
Yeah, I truly believe that this is an equity issue. I mean, it may not be what we think of, but you just said so yourself. There are families some of the migrant families, as one example, where people have their own ideas of how they want to raise their children, and it is an equity issue for everybody. Like, people should be able to say, this is what I want and need for my child, and there's just not a one size fits all for families. And that, it's funny because it seems so obvious, right?
Right.
It seems so obvious, but as I was going through this kind of the pandemic, I was thinking like, well, we should always be this responsive. We should be able to be this responsive.
Right. It shouldn't require a once in 100 years.
Yeah.
True.
I was wondering if you guys were seeing, so I was really struck by some experts who were saying, okay, a pandemic is a type of disaster. And what we know from the disaster literature is that there are going to be secondary impacts. And so children, especially young children, have not been the focus of the primary impacts of COVID because of their risk of getting the illness or lower risk.
Yep.
But people are really concerned about the secondary impacts, right? So as the adults and systems around them get impacted, then they're going to have impact. And that one of those things could be in the social, emotional, or mental health area, because of what we know about disasters in general, is that there's a surge of mental health needs after the initial emergency response. And I just didn't know if you guys had reflections in this conversation around family stability and what do families want. Your reflections on that, on kind of like social emotional needs, or what is it? Are people starting to try to articulate it, or is this an area where people don't know what they need, but they know that they're either isolated or burned out, or they're, the anxiety that they were even talking about in November, kind of where that anxiety is now?
Well, I had a chance to interview a lactation specialist with Southern Pediatrics, and she's been a specialist for about 16 years. And she said she's never seen the level of anxiety and stress in new mothers as she's seeing now. And what a smart thing they did was they kept their moms group going over Zoom. And because that connection between moms who are all going through, parenting together is so important, that the mom she was working with just kept saying, when are we going to have the next one? When are we going to have the next one? We're going to have the next one. So they're trying to organize now to find ways to meet outside in a park so they can see each other, in person, that kind of thing. But really emphasizing that social connection is just so important. And then on the secondary, you're talking about, and I'm sure Angie's heard this too, DHS is concerned with the decrease in reports of child abuse, but we know that doesn't happen during because of the stress level during emergencies. But we just have fewer eyes on kids because they're not coming to schools and they're not out in public as much. So That's a huge concern for people. It's like, okay, how are we going to, again, it goes back to family stability.
Right.
How do we make sure people, that the stress of the epidemic is lessened for people so that incidents of abuse and neglect are also decreased?
Yeah, I want to go back to what, oh gosh, I, what was the first point you made before you got into secondary impacts? Because I was going to say something.
Oh, about
That social connection, that social connection,
Oh, right,
the moms
right,
group.
right.
You know?
The moms groups. And yeah, what I'm seeing is that, you know, I think that, this time out where parents have been forced to stay home
mhm,
with their kids for an extended time,
yeah,
um, you know, especially the working parents that weren't always home all the time.
right.
But even the parents that aren't working weren't home with their kids all the time if their kids were here at school. So I've had more parents willing to reach out for help,
Mm,
more parents willing to call in to, you know, we're doing a parent support group with a therapist weekly. And I'm doing a weekly meeting with parents now just to talk about the reopening of our center and what that's going to look like. And so they can ask questions and express their concerns and things like that. And I don't have a lot of people coming, or they might pop in for a period to ask their questions and pop out. But I'm actually having more contact with parents now and seeing more engagement, even though it's not a lot. It's a lot
mm,
more than it was before. But
Mm.
I think that parents are willing to ask, first of all, because they know they're not alone. They know they're not the only one.
right,
They've seen it on Facebook. You know, they hear it from their friends that, oh, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm not alone.
right.
Other parents are going through this too. And so I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to offer more engagement. I think one of the reasons that one thing that's been helpful is by doing things Zoom. People can do it wherever they are, you
Yep.
know, usually a little bit more flexible time. And we're doing evening things as well. But it's just helped me see that, you know, parents want to be engaged. It's just really hard to figure out all the times that we can try to get parents engaged. But I've seen more people reaching out for help and support. And so I think that's a plus coming out of this. And I'm hoping that we can ride that wave and maybe continue. You know, I think there's less stigma around asking for help just because people know other people are going through it too.
Right. So as you think about this kind of reflection of what you're seeing and hearing from your communities, you know, the first question they gave us is, what are your content priorities for the next year? And then kind of the reason we picked 2023 was that would have been the technical ending of the 5-year strategic plan of Raise Up Oregon. You know, I think we'll see what that really means for us. You know, as we see how long this stuff comes, you know, definitely the uncertainty of this pandemic is probably what's wearing us all out, as well as the actual conditions, right? Is that I think people would be like, well, if I could just make it to, if I know I have to make it by X date, you know, people would be a lot better than this uncertainty. But so I was just wondering if you had reflections of how you would translate this. So as you think about your role as a council, and that part of this question is, what should the council priorities be, right? So one way we could exist the priorities is, what's the council focus on? Or if we form a couple of committees, what would be, you know, this brainstorm of what would their focus be? But I also think this can also inform our conversation with Alyssa, like, of what you would want the governor's office to potentially hear from you and your colleagues, thinking about the next year, as well as your thoughts, kind of not knowing how long this will be, but kind of thinking kind of at the end of the 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we said content, so it could be broad. You know what I mean? So it could be, so if we wanted to summarize some of these things that you've been talking about family stability, how are we truly understand their needs and are responsive to them? How do we deal with kind of this high level of anxiety and isolation and the want to reach out? You know, how would we translate that into some of the things? And even then, if there's I think we wanted to keep it flexible. So if you wanted to point out specific parts of the plan, we can do that as well, but that's not completely necessary. for this brainstorm part of the conversation.
Well, it's interesting because workforce is still a central issue. And I think from the conversations we had previously, raising the pay and benefits for the workforce, even if we have to have fewer slots in daycare, because now the childcare situation is in flux, not knowing who's going to go back to work when, etc.
Right.
But the people working in the workforce, they need to be able to earn a living wage and have livable benefits. I mean, it's absolutely crucial for that to happen. Otherwise, that just adds to the family instability problem, because they have families, and they take care of families.
Right.
And so I would still say it's pretty central to our efforts.
And I want to talk about access to and that would be objective number 2, families have access to high quality, affordable early care and education that meets their needs. So that responsiveness also attaches to objective number 2. But I specifically want to talk about access around two things, really. One, the child care desert, and places like here in my community, I'm the only provider.
Right.
But 2, really the affordability of access. And I'm thinking specifically about, OPK and Preschool Promise are needs-based programs that are run through the ELD. But the ERDC is a needs-based program that's run through DHS. And they're 2 different systems. And I think they need to be one system. And it doesn't make much sense to turn OPK and Preschool Promise over to DHS. So it makes more sense that ERDC was part of early learning, and all those programs could be tied together. And they're all needs-based programs.
Right.
We're already enrolling and, serving people, at various degrees of poverty through OPK and Preschool Promise. And ERDC also needs to expand. We need to be able to serve more people.
Absolutely.
Through ERDC, because providers can't afford to provide it for any less. We're going to have to access whatever dollars are available. So I want to make sure that one also stays on the radar. But I totally agree with what Peter said about workforce. It's still a central issue. If we want to serve families, we have to have the workforce.
Are you seeing that as you get clearer about family needs, that also puts a certain pressure on the workforce? I was just trying to think about if they're of the community and they're kind of experiencing the same thing. So, but they're supposed to have a space where they can offer family support or be responsive. And so I just didn't know if you had reflections. I was trying to think about if we raise some of these issues around workforce and what do we really mean by access, how do we tie in the conversation that you had around family stability, high anxiety, the desire to connect one way or another.
Yep. Workforce needs to be trained in family engagement. And I've been thinking about that with my own team because they've been doing a lot more outreach to families. So we're a 5-day-a-week program. So my teachers are generally with kids Monday through Friday. So we have a different set of staff that do family engagement. Right. But that's not the way I wanted it. It's just what I inherited. Now that we're in the pandemic, I've had my teaching staff. I tell them, you are the primary contact for these families. I want them to be communicating more regularly with them. And so I've been thinking, like, if we're going to continue with this model for a period of time, my staff need a lot more training on that family engagement, how to talk to families, I think my staff knows a lot about the families, but they're used to talking to little kids. They're not used to talking to adults.
Nice.
And that training piece is really important. If we want to be responsive, then we do need that training.
That's not just in early childhood. It's K-12 sucks at family engagement. It just it does.
So maybe that could be one of our areas of shared collaborative professional development, K-12 and early learning all together, some family engagement training. So I have 4 things. I don't know if that's pretty much what you have, but I have the social emotional health for parents and children,
Yeah.
Access and affordability / ERDC, responsive to family need, and the workforce.
Yeah.
And I have a few things under each one of those too.
That's great. So when you think about the social emotional health for children and families, what are you thinking about? Because I think it could be a whole continuum of informal and formal. So I was wondering, like when you guys were talking about it, what do you think about the informal supports for families around and children around social emotional health? You know, I think there's been some conversations trying to use PDG to help think about early childhood mental health consultation being available to teachers and directors and home providers. But I think some people also think about the formal mental health system and the access to assessment or treatment or some kind of counseling support. So what were you guys kind of picturing or thinking about?
We're adopting the Strengthening Families framework. Just trying, because to use that cross sector, and just trying to look at those protective factors. When do families need concrete help? How do we find out if they need concrete help?
Right.
How can we help enhance social emotional skills for parents and for children? So that framework does a good job of giving us a way to go kind of in a systematic way to strengthening families, to what we're all about. So it's a variety of things, not just a single source. It's kind of like the concrete resources, the tools for self-regulation. How do we get information to new parents? Are we consistent with the way that we get information to new parents so they can understand a little bit more about how their kids' brains develop and the impact of trauma and the tools for resilience?
I agree. I think it is a continuum, and it is the informal as well as the formal. So we have mental health consultation model here at the program, and we're actually looking on bringing that in-house. Right now we contract, and we have somebody that provides services, but we're looking at bringing that in-house for the whole education department within the tribe, from pre-K, from birth really through 12. Because we have other programs here on campus that serve children and families in the upper grades. And so I think that the informal is really important. That's supportive of, really, it's the teachers and the parents, the consultant. But we also do direct service as well. So those kids that rise to that level can also get play therapy on site during the day, during the school day here. But then informally, it's those parenting education opportunities that are focused on social emotional learning. And that's the direction I'm really going to try to start getting my staff to go. If we continue remote learning, I want to focus more on social emotional health with parents. Like, here's what you could do at home to support your kids. And this is what you're seeing. Because parents, they want an answer that's, you know, what do I do when my kid does X or Y? My kid's always doing, and really there isn't an easy answer. It's going back to those basics of the social emotional health. So yeah, it's definitely a wide continuum. And so it's kind of like you want to do these universal things for everybody, and then it's tiered approach. Yeah.
I think it's great if you can get someone in-house, Angie. That would be remarkable.
I am so excited that my boss, I've always wanted this, and then I can't really find it in my budget for full time, but she said she really wanted it for the other grades. So I said, I'll put up half of the salary if you put up the other half, and I get 20 hours a week. I'm just really thrilled about it. And it's the person we're contracting with. He's ready to take a new job. He would love to be here full time. So we even have a transition of providers. It would be the same provider.
Wow. And then if you could get a committed 20 hours, that
really big deal.
So the second question is kind of funding priorities. So as you kind of think about what's facing our state, Peter, maybe your insight of how the legislature works and where the governor has flexibility and that kind of thing. You can see, some of the examples are to help us think about are there some things that maybe the council members should communicate about protecting, minimizing? I think there's been a national movement of a lot of the national orgs that I'm part of thinking about how do we create frameworks or ways of helping states think about build back better, like when there are cuts, what's the opportunity to change how things are built? And I feel like some of your BRUAC members are kind of thinking along those lines about, well, if things aren't working, this is and we're going to lose a lot of money. This is the attempt to like change how we do things. And so just thinking about if we could talk about it generally, and then question 3, maybe we'll take the last few minutes before your break to think about if there's any, across this brainstorming, is there specific recommendations you want to make? In addition to raising these issues that you brought up. But what are your thinkings around the kind of funding situation and maybe living through other downturns that the state has faced and that kind of thing about what this means for early childhood and the early learning system?
Well, I think the governor's instincts, as she's already shown, is she wants to protect the advances that have been made in early childhood. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing that we argued about when I was in legislature, because I kept saying, we can't do this unless we're going to sustain them. And she kept saying, we're going to sustain them. I kept saying, I don't know if we're going to sustain them. So we go back and forth on that. So I think that's her instincts are there. I like Andy's idea of expanding ERDC and moving it to early learning. But that's a clear funding priority that we could look at. And this is a little bit off the wall, but by 2023, I would love to see something very bold in terms of workforce, something along the lines of everyone who graduates with a degree in early childhood development has their student loans forgiven if they guarantee they'll work in the field for 3 years in the state of Oregon. Something big like that.
That's awesome.
I got to write that down, Peter.
Me too.
We're a very efficient group, I think.
Well, if Peg was here, we'd have another,
Right.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. I'm sorry that we've missed Peg, actually. I wanted to hear what she was thinking around the health system,
Well, it's been interesting working here with the folks from Rural Community Health, La Clinica and Siskiyou Health too. They are shifting pretty strongly in great ways. This experience has been hard on them, but they're experiencing the same thing in a lot of regards, where they're doing a lot more telehealth, telecounseling, but they're also having to be more proactive in family engagement, and to really look at the whole family in ways that it's been in theory for a long time, the social determinants of health,
right?
But now they're screening. Every person who walks in the door gets screened for the social determinants of health. And they're doing proactive outreach that way to say, okay, your housing situation's not good. Well, let's make sure we hook you up with this service provider that might be able to help stabilize that. So I would love to get Peg's view on it, because I really do think healthcare is making some shifts in some good ways to really look at the whole family.
Yeah, because I was thinking the both and, right, about some of the really positive shifts that they're trying to make, and how this recent work is really bringing the stuff that they were probably already trying to work on, but how it made it even clearer, and maybe even clearer to the general public for their support in the shifts of where health and healthcare need to go. I know that in talking to Miriam, we've been wondering about what does this mean for developmental screening, immunizations. Like, we were trying to think about the particular kind of health things that you might be concerned about for young children. And so maybe we can reconnect with Peg at some point to get her insights of some of these creativities that we want to keep, that informs the new way we want to work. And then some of these things, kind of like what you guys were talking about, where are we worried? Okay, if we're worried on family stability, around housing, around financial stability, around isolation, then kind of like what would be the same kinds of things that they would be talking about around health. because Angie, I wonder if her list around access, your list around access of deserts and affordability and coherence of the services that exist would actually fall in the same bucket for healthcare, right?
Right,
So,
right.
are there deserts? Where do people get their healthcare from? Is it affordable? What kind of insurance do they have access to?
Right.
And then what is it that they're receiving, right? So it seems like overlapping
Yeah.
kind of conversations we could potentially have.
So quick story about your comment about the general public starting to understand more about the social determinants of health. The city of Medford, 4 years ago, when discussions were taking place about issues of homelessness, their basic approach was get them out of our city. That was their approach. In less than 4 years' time, they've developed a tiny house village called Hope Village, and now they're talking about having a campground like Eugene has, where people can actually safely be living in tents, if that's what has to happen, rather than be scattered down by the Bear Creek like it is now. It's been a huge change in 4 years.
Yeah.
I do think the awareness is starting to increase of what actually families are going through and people are going through.
Right.
I did have one other thing on my list
Okay,
that we haven't really touched on, and I don't really know where it fits, but it's something that I'm really concerned about. Ever since K-12 education went remote, what I'm hearing a lot from parents is, I'm not a teacher, I can't do this.
Right.
And that's exactly the opposite of what we've been telling people. You're your child's most important teacher. And
oh my gosh, that's so struck with me. She is a parent.
I really want to change the narrative so that we can continue to help parents see you are the expert on your child. You're not the formal teacher, but you're still the most important teacher. And I just want that narrative to somehow change, because I don't want parents to feel like they're not the teacher. And I don't want other providers to buy into that and accept it. I want them to say instead, no, you might not be the teacher, but you are the expert on your child and your family. So that's just something that's been concerning me.
Yep.
Do you think parents are reacting from like the content sometimes of education, like the formal like math, like because I was reacting around like, do I remember how to add fractions?
Gosh.
Or like he was subtracting big numbers, and I was like, I have no words to describe for you how to do it, but if I just show you how I do it, maybe you'll figure out one.
Maybe there's a distinction to be made between curriculum teachers and life teachers.
Exactly. Oh, that's lovely, Peter.
Because one thing that Bruce Perry talks about is how kids are learning from us constantly.
Right.
And even on the self-regulation skills, one of the most important tools for a child to learn self-regulation is the child's mom's face, because the child watches the mom's face all the time. And as the mom reacts to things and then regulates, the child's learning that over and over and over again. So just giving your kid access to your face is a big life lesson,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Because I also don't want parents to also think, I don't want this to make a greater divide between I want parents and teachers to be partners.
Yeah.
And I don't want parents to take this and go, whoa, and step back even farther.
Right.
And say, I'm not the teacher, you're the teacher.
One of the superintendents I interviewed was really, she's the one who admits that K-12 does not do a good job of engaging with parents. And her push to the people that work in our district is, you have to understand, parents are sending us the best children they have. And you just got to understand that. They're not trying to send kids that are problems. They're saying the best kids they have. And we have to work in partnership. We have to find a way to work in partnership to help every kid move forward. So from her point of view, the educator's perspective has to change. As well as the parent's perspective has to change.
So there's opportunity for more parent engagement, but it's incumbent on both sides to shift that perception or thinking. Because like we said earlier, the workforce needs to be trained to talk to parents. and and I think that parents, I want to make sure that they know that you're still the expert on your child. You are the expert on your family. And so we definitely need them to be partners. So maybe they're not the formal teacher, but they're the most important teacher.
So a quick story though, that even get the voice of kids into the mix as well. I interviewed a kindergarten teacher who decided a couple of years ago that at the start of the year, she would talk to the kids in her class about what rules they'd follow in the class. And the kids would come to agreement. The kids kind of said, this is the kind of class we want to have. And then she'd say, everyone has to raise their hand, or everyone takes turns, whatever, everyone's nice to each other. And then she said to them, okay, well, what rules do I have to follow? And the kids all discussed it, and they came up with 2 rules. She has to talk in a nice voice, and she has to love them all the time, every day. That was the second rule. I thought that was so cool. And she said she had a great year with those kids. Just a great year with them. She was just.
I love that.
And you see how, like, they didn't ask for candy every day. They asked for love every day. You know what I mean? Like, they know what they want and need too, right? Kind of, you were saying families know what they need, so do kids.
I love that. That's great. Ask the kids.
Well, I think we have a very powerful list here.
Someone's got to send it to me.
I'm going to rewrite my notes, but I will. I have to send it to Remy anyway, so.
All right.
I just want to kind of rewrite them and make them pretty.
Yeah, so Peter, can we help you in preparing for the report out?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to there. Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
So are we going to report on the 3 questions, basically?
Yeah, or I think we could summarize across the 3 questions. I wasn't under the impression from Sue that it would be like walk through each question. I think you could give an arc of the conversation of where you started with family stability and then how that informed.
Yeah. So family stability.
Kind of responsive to family needs.
Yep.
Your description of like really seeing high anxiety.
Yep. The need for outreach and actually listening.
Right. And I think the distinction that you guys made about seeing, Peter, you might want to share that you saw these trends before COVID hit.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That these were, and that COVID's just aggravating things. And I think that will resonate with the overall theme of the meeting and how Kali started us off. These are things that we knew about, and we're trying to do something together. But I think what COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement have done is kind of crystallized like the urgency for the action or something, And then Angie, how would you, I think, Peter, would it be good for you to give you the buckets and then we could decide the phrasing, but there was workforce, family engagement, the access to childcare deserts and the affordability of access, social emotional health for children and families. And then kind of the 3 funding requests was support the governor's approach to protect the gains made in early childhood, expand ERDC and move it to early learning, and by 2023 have a bold workforce.
That was forgiving student loans? for
Right.
early childhood graduates that work in the state. Peter, did you say what was your idea? They work for the state in the state
For 3 years. They have to commit for 3 years.
3. I wrote down 3. I just wanted to make sure I heard you right. So great. I like that.
You didn't want to make it 5?
These days,
Maybe
I
we should.
don't know what a lot of the forgiveness things look like in other fields. You know, I was realizing that, I don't know. You know,
I do think in healthcare, I do think it's 5 years. There's a number of programs that help med students retire their debt if they commit to working in rural areas. In fact, my cousin did one of those on the Navajo Nation. And he ended up staying there.
wow.
But I think it might be 5-year minimum. Maybe we should look into that.
yeah.
I'll just write down in my notes 3 to 5 years.
There you go.
There you go.
That's the way. That's the way these things get done. Yeah.
Peter, I would definitely tie the being responsive to family needs to the equity issue as well.
Yep.
I think we have a good list.
Hey, and there's only 2 of us, Andy, so if I leave anything out, you can jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're trying to figure out how we can measure social connection.
No, that's a really interesting question.
It is darned hard. There are some surveys, but then in a certain sense, I don't know how we consistently survey over time.
Right.
Throughout the entire region.
Right. Have you seen any of the publications from the University of Oregon on their rapid, I forget what they call it. It's their rapid national survey of families in response to COVID. So there's this, they've been doing a quick, I'll forward you, I forwarded it to David, where they can start to see trends. So they saw, for example, in social emotional, all families having high anxiety and social emotional concerns for their children as we all entered into physical socialing. And then I can't remember where it hit in the calendar of like between March and now, where the concerns kind of leveled off for middle class families.
Yep.
And maybe it's because we've established new routines or figured out additional supports, or I think it was with the transition of kind of school starting to end, so maybe people had figured it out. But that it's going up for families in specific groups. And if I remember them right, it's low-income families, families with children with a delay or disability, and I'm forgetting the third category. And so those I think would make sense to us, right?
Yes. Yes.
In terms of what other kinds of stressors do you have in your life? And so then how does that, what personal resources do you have to create the routines and activities that kids need when they're home all the time?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, like, if I had done a report in the spring, I might have said to you, all families are having a shared experience.
Right.
But now the data, like X amount of months out, some families are actually have started to figure it out.
Yeah, we had Southern Oregon Pediatrics did a survey of families, and some of their families actually said that family life was improved from this because they had more time with each other. You know, they were playing board games with each other, and they had more interactivity than they had before. Only small percentage said that.
Right.
But
right.
But for some they've been able to adjust.
Right.
But for many,
so like to me, I wonder what we should look at what categories they're doing rapid surveying or whatever, what their approach is to their national surveys and what that could mean for Oregon, since they're based out of Oregon, of like this kind of social connection piece of like, how do we understand it? How do we ask about it? And how does it change over time without, driving them nuts with too many surveys?
So basically, how do you measure it? I mean, do you measure it through, civic participation? You measure it, that's one way to look at it. We increase people voting in city council elections.
Oh, yeah.
That's might be one way to look at it.
There's a really interesting researcher, I think she was at Cornell University. She spoke to a group of our state leaders of the connection between voting and civic engagement with participation in public benefits or supports. So I think she looked at Medicaid, TANF, and SNAP. I should find the title of her book for you. It's really interesting because it's not exactly, I think it depends on which system you interact with and how humane and how they view you may increase you appreciate the support and then you vote versus others that really treat you inhumanely, and then that tends to decrease participation. So I'll find her book for you, Peter, because it is an interesting area of research that she's doing.
Well, along the same lines, I have to say I'm really impressed with there's kind of culture change happening with DHS in our region, hopefully across the state, but it's like a really significant change. I mean, they are working tremendously hard to keep families together, family coaching model, that type of thing. It's impressive. Their language has changed, their approach is changing. They developed a regional resource guide. They put out every Monday an updated resource guide, so all the agencies know what the most recently updated resources are. And it's much more proactive and positive.
Did you see in Remy's memo that she sent out on Friday of some of the kinds of strategies the state agencies have been doing since COVID in the child welfare area? They had been doing daily virtual connection with families instead of like the twice a week, and they're finding real benefit from that daily interaction that previously would have, that they'll probably never go back. Right? Like even if they finally get to do in person again, they'll still keep the assumption that there should be daily contact. Right?
That's fantastic. I really do.
Good stuff. And on one hand, you're like that should have been so obvious. But it almost is like a crisis that says, how are we going to do this? And then you realize how everyday it is. You know what I mean? And that it is possible to kind of do that.
So I work out of the Southern Oregon Education Service District offices, and they've had these policies about really frowning on remote work. It's just not workable. And now after 3 months, they're kind of like, we might switch to this model. It seems to be it's holding down costs. It's
right, especially if we want to increase funding that's available to the actual services or supports.
Exactly.
If we can save costs in another area, how does that help us?
Oh goodness.
Well, this has been a really great conversation, you guys, and I'm excited about what you'll be reporting out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from the other groups too.
Yeah.
We've been going through this process within our collaboration for the past 2 weeks. We have our final meeting tomorrow. And as I mentioned at the start, the desire for every sector to move upstream as much as possible is really strong. We had some interesting discussions with the workforce development people and some of the small business owners about family stability in regard to even work schedules. Can we have consistent work schedules? And a way to agree that that's a priority for us. And just a lot of interest in the same thing we've been talking about now. These are the same discussions I've been having with our partner organizations for a couple of weeks now. And I'm cautiously optimistic we'll come out tomorrow going through a process similar to this with some really specific pilot projects that we can pursue. Things like the earned income tax credit. Maybe we'll do a campaign around the earned income tax credit every year, so that families know it's there and that they should apply for it.
Right.
So the other major suggestion was, do we start a campaign to have a school-based health center at every elementary school, and acknowledge the fact that K-12 is really looked to now to be a coordinator of social services, and can we do that through a school-based health center without putting additional burden on the educators? So the school-based health centers we have here are doing fantastic work, and they've been really, really helpful. So
it's really that creativity of where a family's already going, right?
Exactly.
And how do you meet them there instead of always asking them to go to 5 million other places?
Exactly.
Yeah. I looked up that article you were talking about, the rapid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll have to save that and read it later.
Nice.
Yeah, RAPID stands for Rapid Assessment of Pandemic Impacts on Development. Early.
Ah.
Yeah.
Did you just Google U of O rapid? What'd you?
Yep. I did.
Nice.
I did. I have two computers here. I have my laptop because my computer on my desk does not have a camera. So I'm using
yeah.
my laptop for that. But then my computer's right here. So
Cool. Look at this. Great.
So if we're done, maybe we can break early.
Yeah, you can definitely break it early. And if you just leave your computer there, right, Remy,
Yeah.
the system will automatically bring them back to the main room. They don't have to click in on anything. So yeah, you could have an extra 5 minutes to your break.
Might as well. Might as well take it.
Right, exactly.
Yes. We'll move. Thanks. See you in a
Thank
bit.
you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carrie.